Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to MetrObelisk Radio. Today we are looking at the original Mad Max movie that came out in 1979. Now this movie had an up-and-coming actor that most of you may know nowadays, and that would be one Mr. Mel Gibson. This movie has a post-apocalyptic setting, but if you've never seen the original movie and only watched the Mad Max movies post-Road Warrior, is this going to be the movie for you? Yes, it's a post-apocalyptic movie, just like the others, but it's different from every Mad Max movie from the Road Warrior on. Now, before we get started, make sure to follow the blog, MetrObeliskradio.blogspot.com, where you can stay up to date on all the MetrObelisk Radio uploads, no matter if they're exclusive to YouTube, BitChute, LBRY, wherever you're currently watching this, if you're in the future. Now, with that out of the way, let's get right into Mad Max. Like with all the other retrospectives we do here, we start off with the creative team, and this movie was directed by George Miller, and it would be his first feature that he directed. After this, he would move on to do all the other Mad Max movies, obviously. He also did the segment Nightmare at 20,000 Feet for the Twilight Zone movie that released in the mid-80s. The segment obviously being a remake of the classic episode of the original television series that starred William Shatner. After this, he did movies such as Lorenzo's Oil, The Witches of Eastwick, Babe, Pig in the City, Happy Feet, and Happy Feet 2. Now let's move on to the writers, and we'll start with the man himself. We'll start with George Miller. His writing credits include all of the Mad Max movies and all other movies that are listed under his directing credits, with the exception of the Twilight Zone movie. He also wrote a TV miniseries called Bodyline, and he wrote the first Babe movie. Now let's look at the other writer, and that would be James McCausland. He co-wrote the screenplay with George Miller. As far as writing credits, this movie is it. The only other writing credit he has is the Mad Max motion comic that came out in 2013, and he went uncredited for that. And finally, we move on to Byron Kennedy. Now, he co-wrote the original story with George Miller, and he was one of the co-founders of Kennedy Miller, the production company which produced the Mad Max movies. Now, the company would remain as Kennedy Miller until 2009, when the name changed to Kennedy Miller Mitchell. Now, this production company would not only be Australia's oldest, but also their most successful internationally. Byron Kennedy, after Mad Max, would go on to be the producer for The Road Warrior and a couple of TV miniseries, The Dismissal and The Cowra Breakout, until his death in 1983 from a helicopter crash. The last producing credit he ever received was EP on the TV miniseries Bodyline. Now let's move on to our character analysis portion of this, and we're obviously going to start with Mel Gibson as Max. Now this character is set up very similarly to a character that Clint Eastwood plays in all of his westerns. He's the mysterious stranger, one that the audience doesn't know and the entire town doesn't even know. In this case, Max is a cop, so it would make sense for all the cops to know who he is, and even the town that he's policing in. Even though Mel Gibson is playing a Clint Eastwood-style character, Max isn't a full-on Clint Eastwood character because he's not the stranger that rolls into town, helps the town with its gang or corrupt politics problem, and leaves quite yet. To not drag this out for too long, he's the cop that's policing a town that has entered into the early stage of the apocalypse, where there's still law and order, but society is starting to break down. Now, normally I would go down a list of other characters in this movie and talk about their arcs, the character archetype, etc., but I'm not going to do that here, and that is for one main reason. Every character in this movie is here to support Max. Every character has an action that's tied to the plot of from getting Max to point A to point B, and then getting all the way to the final confrontation. Goose is only in the movie to die, to get Max to question whether or not he really wants to be a cop. Max's wife and son are in the movie to give Max some reason to go after the primary antagonist, Toe Cutter, after they get killed. It also explains why he's so cold-hearted in future installments. To sum up this entire character analysis portion, Max is the type of character that is reacting to the plot. Every other character is being used to service the plot that has Max reacting in different ways based on the circumstances. Now let's jump into the narrative of this movie, and if we look at this movie narratively, this is basically a take on the Western genre, and I would argue it's more a take on the man with no name Westerns. The only difference between this movie and movies like A Fistful of Dollars, Two Meals for Sister Sarah, or High Plains Drifter, other than Clint Eastwood being in them, is Mel Gibson's character has a name. Also, instead of horses, there's cars and motorcycles servicing as those. Now, the narrative starts out with a car chase involving someone named the Night Rider, and he dies in the process. Toe Cutter, who's the primary antagonist, threatens the police with the fact that I'll be coming for you because you killed one of my own men. Initially, the police just go, Yeah, what else is new? Then there's a guy and girl where the guy dies, but the girl is captured and presumably raped, and I'm just speculating on that because nothing is really shown. The police bring the guy in, but the charges get dropped because the girl never showed up for the trial. So the trial ended in what is known as no contest over in Australia. That's when Toe Cutter basically carries out his plans on targeting the cops who killed the Knight Rider. He starts with Goose. Goose gets badly burned, and that leads to Max wanting to quit. Instead, his boss just tells him to take a vacation. On the vacation, Toe Cutter catches up to him and kills Max's wife and son. The last 15 to 20 minutes is Max just carrying out his revenge on the people who killed his wife and son. And the end of this movie begins Max's journey as the lone wanderer, so to speak. Now to close this narrative analysis off, I know that I didn't spend too much time here, but Mad Max is more a character-driven movie than a plot-driven movie. The point of this movie is to build up Mad Max into the hero that he would become later. Now let's take a look at how the movie was received at the time. Now this movie received a Rotten Tomatoes score of 90% based on 61 critic reviews and an audience score of 70% based on 142,090 audience reviews. This movie has a Metacritic score of 73 based on 14 critic reviews and a user score of 6.9 out of 10 based on 210 ratings. And this movie sits on IMDb at 6.9 out of 10 based on 186,358 reviews. Now, this movie was made on a budget of 400,000 Australian dollars, so that's roughly 300,000 American, and it grossed over $100 million worldwide. Now, this movie would receive the Guinness World Record for most profitable movie ever made, and Mad Max would hold on to that record for the next 20 years. It lost the record when the Blair Witch Project came out in 1999. Now, when we see these aggregate scores, these Rotten Tomatoes, these Metacritics, these IMDb's, we are only looking at this movie through a modern audience's eyes. Back when this movie originally released, it was very polarizing critically. One critic said that this movie had all the emotional uplift of Mein Kampf and would be a special favorite of rapists, sadists, child murderers, and the Charles Mansons of the world. Variety, the one of the trade publications for the film industry, did praise this movie at the time. Now, this movie critically came down to either you loved it or you hated it. There really was no in between. Now, Mad Max is a good one-off movie. If you examine this movie as a character piece, then it would be something like this. The movie starts with Max being one of the best cops, and then over the course of the movie, losing his sanity over the gangs that are taking over the town, and then snapping when his wife and son are killed by those same thugs. If there was never a sequel to this movie, then this movie could have been written off as an examination of what happens when a man gets pushed too far. And I'll end the episode off with this. The first movie in this franchise of 4 actually does have cultural relevance, and I wanted to get to that here. As I stated earlier, this movie at one point was the most profitable movie ever made until the Blair Witch Project came out 20 years after. Now, this movie would kickstart the Mad Max that we all know and love to this day. Also, this movie opened up the world to the Australian/Oceanic film industry. Without the work that George Miller and Byron Kennedy put into this movie, Mel Gibson doesn't become one of the biggest movie stars in the world. Now, some of you might rejoice at that notion that Mel Gibson doesn't become one of the world's biggest movie stars, blah, 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 blah. But Mel Gibson has been in plenty of classics, from Lethal Weapon to Braveheart to The Bounty to We Were Soldiers. Now, I'll go one further. If Mad Max hadn't taken off like it did, then I don't think we see Peter Jackson even having a mainstream career with his Lord of the Rings trilogy or King Kong movie. And we also don't even see the likes of Russell Crowe even getting a mainstream Hollywood career, had it not been for George Miller and Byron Kennedy running the risk on a little $300,000 movie with a no-name Mel Gibson at the time.